Hello, everyone. Hi, friendos. Welcome to the live stream. So we just premiered the first episode of Remember the Human, an AI podcast about people. Featured Ryan Michael Caligiuri, so I appreciate him for being on the show. And this is what I'm going to call episode 1A, just an afterthoughts episode where I'm going to talk to you about some of my thoughts after the conversation, like some of the things I kind of thought about after I chatted with Ryan, and really, well, before I'll get into the logistics. This will be available on YouTube, so I'm going to be preparing these on YouTube like this right after the episode. But the audio only versions will be available via Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, wherever else I'm broadcasting it out to. But if you want to be a part of the conversation, come to youtube.com and check out the playlist on my YouTube channel. In any case, the whole theme that Ryan brought, we talked about teaching and coaching and how AI, but more specifically generative AI, could have a role in that. And we kind of talked a little bit about this idea of the human touch, and that's kind of what the theme was. And the kind of the takeaway I got from this, if you look at the title of this stream, is AI can extend the air quotes human touch. What do I mean by that? I want to explain that a little bit further. Let's talk about what it means to give something a human touch. Right? We talked about leadership, teaching these different human experiences, right? Very human things. You know, we don't have robotic leaders. We don't have artificial intelligence leaders like today, at least. So when you're asking questions about how can you use an AI or generative AI to provide a human touch, I've really thought that through. And I think Ryan's got it right. It's not going to replace the human touch at all, but it certainly can extend it. You can get a reach to other people that he normally would not be able to engage with as a coach or a teacher. So I want to talk about the two pieces here, about teaching, and then I'm going to talk about coaching. I think teaching is an interesting one because I think that one's one part of that episode and that conversation. It really focused in on, I think you nailed it on the head. Like, there's change coming to education, from students and the teacher's perspective. So as far as I'm concerned, Ryan's taking the right approach, right? Embracing the technology, because you can fight it all you want, but time and time again, we see that the technology, if it's that good, it just becomes we can't put the cat back in the bag. We can't undo it. So now we need to figure out how to adapt to the technology. So when you're talking about it from a teaching perspective, it gets interesting where things that we've been doing for a very long time, if you argue in the universities, we've been doing essays and these same sorts of exercises and assignments. It's going to change how that system works. And some would argue that that's terrible, right? This is a system that's worked for hundreds of years. I would have a counterpoint to that. I don't think the way we taught 100 years ago is the same way we are teaching now. Maybe there's similarities, but again, technology has changed how education is delivered. Just think of the introduction of just, using a common with the computer. How important the computer became when you talked about it in the 70s versus the 80s versus the 90s, the classroom computer versus the computer lab. Kids aren't going to learn how to write anymore. They're not going to learn how to do math. And maybe there's some situations where you can argue, yeah, that's probably true. Maybe the kids aren't doing as much with calculators, or they're not doing as much mental math. They're using computers or calculators as a smaller version of that, right? When the pocket calculator was introduced, a very similar story. Oh, we don't need to do math anymore. That doesn't change the need for it, but it certainly changes the way we grade people and how the rubric needs to work to assess students. And generative AI helps students work out those details so they can work on the content, they can work on the lesson. And the why I think Ryan's got it right is, and I think students should take a real caution to this, because there's this idea like, haha, my job is going to be so easy. I've had a couple of folks actually reach out to me before and saying it's going to be great being a student now because I can just get the AI to write all my essays for me. It's like, well, okay, you could argue, you could do that. You're going to cheat yourself out of an education, or maybe the expectation is going to become higher. Right? Maybe there's an expectation you're going to deliver more essays because you have ChatGPT to help you write them. And you have to it's up to you as the editor of that AI and as the content, as the source of inspiration for the AI to drive the AI to actually come up with better, more engaging arguments, more interesting arguments, and learn how to use that AI to be quick about it. And you're proofreading and you're going over, making sure your argument is sound. Ryan had some good examples of lessons like create a video now. Sure, you could say you could create synthetic AI video. Those systems exist. Again, with generative AI, you can synthesize your voice, you can synthesize a person. They have the generated actors, all that stuff. That all exists. But it's still, you need to script it. You need to get the message across. And the AI can put some stuff together for sure. But if Ryan, as the teacher, is looking for what's your take on it, what's that, again, that human touch. There's more to that than just, what's the word I'm looking for here? There's more to it than just the content itself, right? The way you express it, the mannerisms, the eye contact, your emotions. We're not talking about androids. We're talking about one piece helping you generate content, but you've got to deliver that content. And now teachers can ask students to focus in on that delivery, make it great. Because I know that the writing is not the hard part anymore. That's a solved problem. And so I think that's an interesting take. And I think we're going to see some real changes over the next while with the introduction of generative AI. And there's still going to be people fighting. It's going to be a gradual change. For anyone who's used generative AI, it's not perfect, but it certainly speeds along that boilerplate stuff. It certainly speeds along the editing process. Rather than rewriting it over and over and over again, I can use generative AI to get me something pretty good. Is it the best possible? Are we talking like this is lifelong perfect writing? I would argue no. Maybe it could, but I do think that it allows us to focus on the important bits, which is where I kind of come from this podcast. That's my general belief, and I want to meet people and talk to people about that belief, about how AI can scale the human and enable us to focus on the more interesting parts of the work, of the assignment, of the lesson, of whatever, and leave that communicative bit about the detailed communicative bit, right? Writing the essays for it, right? Proving that, let's make sure the argument is sound, but that's a human thing. The sound logic needs to be coming from the human, and you have to endorse that. So you are on the line for that. But having a personalized editor or an assistant at your hand is just going to force you to be able to, it's going to enable you to focus on the things you need to focus on, the lesson plan, summarizing text, reading more content, figuring out which papers you should read first, which ones are, prioritize your effort and your time. So I think the demand on students is going to get much higher as teachers embrace generative AI. I think it's going to be an interesting time. Hopefully I'll get to talk to some more teachers on the podcast. Now, when it comes to coaching, let's talk about coaching. I have a life coach / therapist, whatever you want to call it, get real personal. I talk to him on the phone. I actually don't see him in person. I don't think an AI can replace the conversations and the breakthroughs I've made with my coach, because of that intonation. At least not today. The tone that he has. Again, it's a very human experience. The sounds, you can pick up the emotion, you can pick up that tension. There's these subtle things you can pick up with people. And when you're talking to another person, it's very genuine, right? You're connecting with a person vocally, or if you're on video call, or if you're in person, right? Like, your body language, looking into a person's eyes, like Ryan had pointed out during the conversation. But what's fascinating is how somehow along the lines we've equated generative AI to a human experience, and that's not the case. So I'll get back to my point about how AI can extend the human touch in the sense of coaching, because it sounds like I'm saying no, but it can. But like he said, I don't think it can replace it, but again, it really can extend it. And how do I know that? I'll put this in the episode show notes. I found an app called, and I don't endorse this app, I've never used it. It's a couple of them called Rocky.ai and selfpause.com. They have an AI life coach. And what it really is a conversational user experience. Now, for those that are not tech people like me, the user experience is really focusing in on how the user experiences your piece of software. A conversational user experience, so one example of user experience would be a mouse and a keyboard, with a screen, like a computer. A conversational user experience is one where you talk to a computer, right? Just through dialogue, through communicative chat, through a chat window, whatever you want to call it. Now, what generative AI gives to that, we've had conversational UXs and chatbots for a long time, but a generative AI gives it a much more human touch. It's a simulated human touch, but the way it's working is it's statistically giving you what you're looking for, and you can tailor these models, these AI models, to deliver content in a very certain way. You can have it pull from your personal data that you're giving to a life coach if they have notes. You can pull from your health records if you've got, like, maybe you've been using Noom, or I was talking about Noom, or just tracking your Apple Health, whatever you're using. If a bot could read that, it can generate very human sounding expressions and language to communicate that to you. So it feels very personable, but it's really just gathering data and then just generating a good response to that, a very human sounding response. And does that replace the human touch? No, obviously not. Like, you could simulate it for sure. And it feels very, I think what's really blown people away with like things like ChatGPT and Google Bard and Llama and like Facebook stuff, like the things that are coming out with generative AI, large language models, is how human it actually feels. It's a unique experience when you start chatting with this. Like Ryan pointed out, it makes him a better coach. He uses the AI to help him summarize text, but he converses with it. He debates with it. Now, is he debating with a person? No, but it is trying to find arguments. It's trying to find those answers to get Ryan thinking a certain way. That's no different than a life coach or my therapist, right? They're trying to get you to think a certain way. So I look at these apps that have these chatbots built in, these conversational user experiences that are built on top of, ideally, probably built on top of generative AI. I'm not going to assume that, but if it could be, I'm sure you could. Sorry, I know you can. Whether they're using it, I don't know. But you can get a very human feeling experience without a human actually being there. So maybe your AI coach is your first line of defense that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's pulling from your, how are you feeling? And then maybe that scales up the coach a bit. You have 10 clients. They're all chatting to reinforce it. Like Ryan talked about reinforcing the learning afterwards. If someone's having a leadership crisis after his workshop, rather than trying to get a hold of Ryan, who's only one person, you start talking to the chatbot about what you can do. And then, I'm using Ryan as the example. He assumes that he is able to, assuming he can tailor a model to kind of deliver his flavor of leadership training. It can provide him with some references, some resources, generate some good content. And you're not going to be as a programmer, like I do program things once in a while. You don't have to be so prescriptive about the different branches that the conversation can take. It doesn't have to be so prescriptive anymore. Now it's just taking text. You've seeded it with a bunch of knowledge, and then it's going to generate something in response to that text. And you're covering all English language or all language, whatever native language you want. On top of that, just to point that out too, you can now translate between languages, right? Like you can have these conversations. They might not be as perfect, but they certainly can, what's the word again? They certainly can help that, again, that extend that human, extend that reach, extend that knowledge sharing that Ryan couldn't do on his own. Now, is that unique to coaching? I focused on coaching. I don't think it is. I think the things that Ryan talked about today, content generation, which is, our content summarization, again, for going over papers, conversational use, rich, enhanced conversational user experiences using things like large language models like ChatGPT. I think this applies to anything you're trying to learn. There's a reason why I wanted to bundle coaching and teaching together, because I don't think they're as different as they are. They are going to have different impacts. The changes are going to be there, but I don't see it that different. We're going to see the same stories over and over again because it's a tool. Ryan pointed this out really well a few times over. It's just a tool, another tool that you can use in your arsenal. How you use it to deliver your product or your service or your skill, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a learner, whether you're a coach, whether you're whatever else you can, whether you're a live streamer, right? Whatever you're using it for, it's just a tool, and it can do very specific things. It can translate, it can summarize, it can generate content, it can give human responses to things. But it's not going to replace that human logic aspect of it, a human feeling, that I want to call that intimacy level of connecting with another person. At least not today. But in the short term, in reality, where we live today in 2023, large language models specifically enhance conversational user experiences. They also allow us to summarize language a lot faster. And again, it enhances us and scales us up. I think that's an interesting way to look at this, especially if you're time limited. We all have a limited amount of time to do these different things we need. And I think it's going to be an interesting take on how training in general works for people and learning in general works for people with generative AI in the mix. And those are my that was the real big takeaway of it, was it confirmed my suspicion around teaching and learning, because I'm not a teacher. I do lectures and things like that. But the idea of using this to enhance my ability to teach, to enhance the amount of content I can review, enhance my ability to tailor my content and my learning to exactly what I want based on how I'm wording it in real time, right? Just start chatting with a bot. It can really give me a proper response and something that feels natural to me. And I think that's a really interesting, that's something we couldn't do before. It was very programmatic. Everything had a very static style to whatever the programmer or whatever the authors, the content writers had. Now we have something that'll generate content that feels right to the tone. And the vendors or the Ryans and the people using the AI to deliver that stuff, the Rocky.AIs, they can tailor the personality they want to get. Right? What style should I be communicating? Should I be short and sweet? Should I be curt? Should I be rude? Should I be polite? Should I be whatever? You can get those personalities and you can start to build these things up over time as we tailor these models and get more unique with them. I think the large language models will be a fascinating way to transform teaching and learning all around. And I think that students that embrace it, I think, beware, watch out for the plagiarism aspect of it, like, because you have teachers that may not agree with you, at least not yet. So feel free to figure that part out before you start using it. I think it's a fair question to ask a teacher what their thoughts are on ChatGPT. On the flip side of that, for teachers, understand that AI detection is not really a thing. These things sound really good. Know that, ChatGPT is just another tool in the tool belt now for you as well. You can expect more from your students. If you can allow ChatGPT to be in your room, to be in that class, you can get them focused on delivering that content. I think that's a fascinating take about how maybe instead of having to write 5 essays a year, you have to write 20. Wouldn't that be interesting, as 1 essay a week? And it has to be great. Sorry, students. I think your job's gotten a lot harder if you're going to school these days. That's my take. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for the first afterthoughts on can AI replace the human touch in teaching and coaching. I've been your host, David West. This podcast was available on Spotify, on YouTube, obviously, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. You can find out more at rememberthehuman.ai and follow us over on LinkedIn if you want. That'd be great. And in the meantime, have a good one and have a pleasant rest of your day.